Hi guys, here's the time-lapse video for the fire skeleton painting I did on my Twitch stream. The video is quite sped up, but I will try comment on as much of my thought process through the video as I can. If anyone has any questions, just add them down below and I will be sure to get to them. I will be streaming on Twitch every day, weekdays around 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and a little later on the weekends. If anyone's interested, I'll be adding process updates as well as announcing when I will be streaming on my Twitter. All links down below. From there, we can get started with the video. Starting the whole thing off with some base colors. I wasn't too sure on the direction I wanted to go with in the painting or the subject matter, though I knew I wanted a maroony red color palette. While I was painting with the colors, I had an idea of charging skeletons and decided to go with that. And from there, it's just about sketching around, trying to figure out some good gestures, and deciding where I'd like to place everything. I initially wanted the painting to be very rough and painterly, but as I worked on it, I decided to flesh it out and more or less finish it as it was going to be the banner for a lot of my websites for a while. In the beginning, I tried not to worry too much about perspective or proportions, mainly focusing on what I'd like the general painting to look like in the end, and use this initial sketch as a template to help me as I went forward. The nice thing about starting with a messy color rough like this is you get a feeling of what it could look like when finished, and you get a few colors to start with instead of starting from a blank canvas. When painting these color roughs, I like to use layer modes like color dodge and overlay. While these work well to get a nice range of colors, they do blow out your values and oversaturate everything. It's a nice place to start, but just make sure you going forward you remember to fix this as your eyes do adjust, and after a while you might not notice how blown out and saturated everything gets. Also, as it's a nice place to start, make sure you don't spend too much time with the color rough as you will have to redo most of it. It's also nice while working to take breaks from the painting and do a few studies on the side to refresh your subject matter. Doing this will also make it easier to spot problems in your work and help you take things to a finish. Usually when I start any painting, I usually start with sketches, so I'm not very good with working from values and shapes and building up the painting from there. There is no right or wrong way to do things. Lots of artists work with shapes and flat colors and manage to pull that off. Others do rough sketches, then proceed to paint on them, and some leave the sketches in the final image. I usually like starting with a fairly tight line drawing, then making a selection on a separate layer and adding color, eventually leaving the line drawing after it stops being useful. I find that way easier to control your edges. It helps keep everything from getting muddy, which is a problem I find when I merge the line drawings with the rest of the painting. I have tried the other methods and they all have their particular strengths and weaknesses. Mainly a lot of them save on time, as you don't need to work from a tight line drawing first. Something to keep in mind when doing the sketch: avoid doing any textures or fine details like buckles or clothing patterns. Try to focus on rather solving the perspective issues as well as the proportions, and overall design, leaving any of the little details for the rendering stage. This way, you save time in the sketching phase. Another thing I like about working from a line drawing is it's easier to change or fix any perspective or proportion problems. You also get less structural issues when starting with a line work, and since you break everything down into steps, it's easier to move forward with less you need to worry about, i.e., in the sketch phase, you just focus on perspective, proportions, and design. In the blocking in phase, you focus on interesting silhouettes, base colors, and the main light sources. And in the rendering step, you focus on texture and refinement. These aren't the only things to think about, but it gives you an idea of what I mean and hopefully shows the usefulness of breaking things down to manageable steps so you don't get overwhelmed. When doing the line work, a few other things I try keep in mind are making sure that all the lines either close off corners or lead in some way to the focal points. It's easy to use arrows and spears in this way, but you can also use the direction people are looking or the direction they're moving. Other ways you can strengthen your focal point is by keeping the horizon line on a level with it, making sure it has the highest point of contrast and saturation if you can, as well as making sure it has the most detail. It's always good to look where you can lose details and flatten shapes and where you need to apply details. In the painting now, I'm just figuring out the gestures and making sure it all works and feels right in the composition. Here with the blue lines, I'm figuring out just the smoke and fire, trying to give it some direction and figuring out the types of shapes I would like that show motion for the illustration. Something that could also help when painting an illustration is having a small story. Not only will it make your painting more interesting, having a small narrative, it will help with figuring out where people should go, what they should be doing and or wearing. The story for this painting was that the skeletons would be marching into battle, and just before they engage, they would ignite with flame. Very simple story, but it helps me in a few ways. For example, the skeletons furthest away and to the left would just be charred smoking skeletons. As they got close, would slowly start igniting. This helped control the contrast of the image and gave a cool effect I could think about while painting. You can also think about the mood and feeling you'd like to convey with the painting, and this would help with the color palette. Here, just refining in some detail what the characters will be doing in the background before I start grouping the shapes. And a lot of the details I will be using as I render. The more figured out these will be, the easier it will be in the rendering phase. Another thing to keep in mind when doing any painting is to not keep going over the same parts. Try to figure out all of the proportion issues in the sketching phase, the lighting issues in the blocking in phase, and so on. If you get to the final detail part of the painting and then notice a glaring issue with the pose or construction of something, going in and fixing it at this point will lose you a lot of time. Also, repainting a hand 10 times instead of just figuring that out in the sketch phase, or fixing your lighting while rendering, these all lose a lot of time and can be the reason you're feeling you take a lot longer in the beginning to finish a painting. This all comes with time though, and you can't expect to get it all in the beginning. It's also useful when doing client work or anything with a deadline to divide your time up. If you have 10 hours to do a painting, try spend 1 hour establishing everything, 2 hours with the line drawing, 2 hours blocking in everything, and 1 hour or so detailing the focal points. This way you already have a painting more or less and will be able to hand in at any time after this point if you need to. This way you won't feel as much pressure and can focus on rendering the final parts. Maybe spending 2 hours on the background and foreground elements while leaving the remaining 2 hours for the focal point. Basically, the more planning you do, the less time you will waste on parts that don't matter while focusing more on the parts that do. When you start to refine everything in the painting, try to keep in mind not to add too much contrast in the background or have too many hard lines. It's easy when you start rendering to waste too much time with the small things and zoom in too close, rendering every little small thing. It's better to refine everything briefly and work your way around the painting, only zooming in when it comes to the focal points and only in parts that need it. This part of the painting can easily take the longest as you can render forever essentially. By not spending too long on any one part, focusing on the details mainly in the light and not the shadows, this will help you save time. While rendering, you should also look at where you can lose details and simplify shapes. This will make the painting better in the long run as it won't be as busy and easier to read, strengthening the focal points. I'll end with just saying that a lot of what I've spoken about is just my take on things from my own experiences. I hope some of it can be useful to anyone, and I want to thank you guys for taking the time to look at the video. As I've said before, all links down below. I will be streaming every day on Twitch, so stop by and say hi. If you have any questions or would like me to elaborate on anything, there would probably be the best place. Thanks all for coming. See you next time.